Hi, my name is Nina, and today I'm going to talk about schooling and traditional schooling and what other options there are, and to persuade you as to why homeschooling is a better choice for your children and or students if these appeal to you and apply to you and you are able to. So homeschooling is a must to me and my family, future family that we're planning. So I kind of want to explain to you some reasons why and share to you what I've learned. So I'm going to start with a little timeline of how education came to be established and all that good stuff. So the first high school actually wasn't established until 1820. 30 years later, the first truancy laws were actually put into place where homeschooling was a thing. In 1867, the Department of Education was established, and homeschooling was a norm. So you were either educated or you weren't at that time, or you went into working. Homeschooling was kind of like a privilege because your parents had to pay for a tutor, and or however you were getting there. It wasn't necessarily like homeschooling was more normal to people. That's what I mean by a norm. So, in 1960, educational reformers actually started questioning the public schooling methods and results. So that is almost 100 years later after the first high school was established. Almost 100 years later, people start to question what was actually going on in these public schools. 20 years after that, in 1980, homeschooling was legal in 20 states. And then another 13 years after, in 1993, homeschooling was legal in all 50. So it took everyone a little while to catch up, but all 50 states ended up getting there. Then in 1999, which I would have been 2 at the time, so you can kind of put into play like how long ago this even was, the U.S. Department of Education's National Council for Education Statistics, or NCES is the abbreviated name for that, places a homeschooling number to 850,000, which may sound like a lot of students, but in the grand scheme of things, it was only ended up being 1.7% of the student population. So in the big picture, it's not that many students, but enough to kind of know, obviously to get a count and have a department for this and all that. So in 2003, so 4 years after the first count, another count takes place where the student rate actually increases a good amount to 1.1 million, and it takes it up to an average of 2% of the student population. And then in 2012, it hikes up again to 1.77 million, and that averages out to about 3.4% of the student population. So that brings us to today. So a little background information, or the homeschool definition, if you are unsure what applies or what counts as homeschooling as to what doesn't. Homeschooling is just also known as home education or elective home education. Is to teach school subjects to one's children at home. So whether it's you or someone you hire in an outside of a traditional public or private schooling environment. So homeschooling is actually the fastest growing form of education in the country, and because of COVID, obviously those numbers are constantly rising. So we saw with high schoolers and younger, when they were put virtually, I know a lot of the younger kids had a hard time paying attention to a screen for so long and sitting still, as opposed to like being there talking with their friends, being able to interact, touch things, and kind of hearing the teacher in front of them. Being confined into an environment, they're at home, and they have the distractions of stuff that could be at home. And I know it's not just elementary schools, it's middle school and homeschool as well, but I'm just using it as an example as how younger kids can be more easily distracted. So then parents started kind of taking over the role as teaching because they felt it fit better for their children to continue on to that learning while that was in play. So my first main point as parents, as teachers, is you get that parental bonding. If you notice that your student or child wasn't learning or absorbing as much information as maybe you think that they could without the traditional kind of like classroom environment, how the teachers were doing it. Now you have the flexibility to customize lessons plans, to be as flexible as you want and spend as much time as you think that they need in a certain subject or learning a certain curriculum. So you have the best learning style, for your kids. Another pro is you are able to then, with the flexibility of adding whatever you would like and having your kids kind of learn what you think is important, you are also able to add more physical activity and have more time for your kids to run around and play outside or learn more hands-on than they are learning in a traditional in a traditional classroom. The National Association for Sports and Physical Education states that all elementary school children should be provided with at least one recess period of 20 minutes. If you think about, again, I'm big on big picture, the big picture of things. 20 minutes of like an 8-hour day of being able to walk around and not being like in tune and taught what to do is just not enough. And for these children running around and getting their energy out to be able to focus and behavioral issues being less of a thing is super important. And because of that, this next statistic is super important to me. It's 16% of U.S. children are overweight. So clearly, the recess time that is being provided to these kids just isn't enough. Some cons. There are, obviously, to every pro, there are cons. So a con, you can overteach your children in certain areas versus an equal scheduled time for each subject. Say you take religion very seriously in your family. If you are sitting there spending most days talking about, the books of the Bible or the 10 Commandments, then that takes away from all other subjects that your child also needs to learn in order to engage interest and see who they are and what they like and what they want to get into as they grow. So parents, also a con, parents cannot focus 100% on their pre-existing careers. If you have a full-time job and it's not an option in your family to not have that full-time job or to switch over, then obviously this is a huge con because there also is a large amount of commitment, responsibility, and schedules that need to be understood and followed if you were to take that on. So another con, socialization. People get really nervous that their children won't be as socialized in a homeschooling environment. They won't have as much exposure to diversity, and they won't have as much independence because they are never away from their parents at that point. You are with them on the day-to-day basis. They're teaching through everything. So some solutions I have to that are work field trips into lesson plans. Science is a big one. Obviously, that makes it easy, but you can also use malls for like math or, independence. But parks, aquariums, zoos, museums, and malls. And another big pro for me is safety. So you have kind of more control over who comes in and out of your house. You have eyes on your children as to at schooling. A lot of tragedies have happened that we hear all the time, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And homeschooling kind of minimizes that as long as the home environment is safe and they're put into, a good place. So it would take down the risk of shootings, bomb threats, kidnappings, bullying, peer pressure. All of that brings it down to a good minimum. So in conclusion, there are so many amazing benefits to homeschooling, and not just for students and children, but for their parents. So at this point, homeschooling is a must. Thank you.